I've got the goods in the truck.
That's good. Finally get to live out your fantasies.
Oh, I've lived those fantasies.
It's worth it.
All right, how's it going?
Yourself.
I'm doing okay. I've been up since 2 in the morning, so I'm in an altered state.
Yeah.
So what are we doing this week? I want to talk about PA4, which was awesome job everybody did. So we'll talk about PA4, and we can run through sample code, but most people nailed it, so that's all good. I want to talk a little more about client server, and I want to play with the router up here and make sure that people know how to use that if you want to run your PA5 across multiple machines. This is available for you to use. It'll be in the collaboratorium after this lecture. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about the URL class, which is good fun. I want to talk about jar files for collecting classes into a single entity that we can point our Java compiler or virtual machine at, so we can distribute collections of classes and make them available easily. I'll probably go through speech as an example of using a jar file. So we'll make our code talk. And I don't know how far this will get us through today, but somewhere we'll finish today. And Wednesday I want to talk about C++ and kind of go through an example of another object-oriented language, just hit some of the highlights and differences between C++ and Java. And then if there's time, I want to talk about Android and go through go through an application of Android Studio and see how painless it is to use it. Yeah. And that will probably be enough for this week. And then next week, Monday, we're going to do presentations from you on PA5. So you'll come up and demonstrate your chat program and show us your code, and we'll talk about it, and so on and so forth. And next Wednesday, I'm planning to spend just doing review for the final and whatever final wrap-up there is. And then we're done. So that's kind of the 2-week plan, this being this week mostly. But let's talk about the end of the road. So we're really at the end of the road here. I graded up PA4 over the weekend, and without doubt, this is a room full of programmers. Okay? So you've done an amazing amount of work. I know you've put in a lot of effort through the whole sequence and through previous years and so on. But you're at the point where you need to be, as far as I'm concerned. You can write Java code. And it's not just that you can write programs. I think you're actually understanding the concepts of objects and classes and modular design and all of these things. And this is exactly where you want to be moving on from Clark. If you're heading off to university next year, I think you're all in good shape. So this was fantastic to kind of see in PA4. So nice work on that. Congratulations. So I posted comments, and if PA4 wasn't working, well, there were a number of cases where there were little things like, yes and no being reversed or something. But if there were bigger problems that actually interfered with gameplay or with file processing, I dug into your code in most cases and tried to put down some pointers, no pun intended, in the comments to where I thought there might be issues. So definitely come by and talk to me if you want to drill into your code. I can help you try to debug it. And it's one of those assignments where a small glitch in the code will have sometimes catastrophically bad effects, right? Because we're dealing with processing files and reading them in, and if you do one thing in the wrong way, right, everything can break. It's just kind of fragile that way. One thing I did want to point out, though, that I saw on multiple cases, lot of hard work in terms of making this thing work, reading in a file, going through the tree, finding a leaf, doing the dialogue, sometimes putting on swing classes, adjusting the tree at the end, and so on and so forth. And in a number of cases, people nailed that. It worked perfectly, 100% on the grade, right? But don't forget the polish, okay? So some of these assignments I would run, and the first thing it says is, does it fly? And like, does what fly? Right? So you're working on this intensely, right? You know exactly what it's doing, right? But don't forget at the end of a project, especially a long project that you put a lot of sweat and blood into, don't forget to take a step back and do a little bit of polishing, right? So one print line, you know, welcome to my game of 20 questions. Think of an object and I'll try to guess it. Hit enter when you're ready to start, right? Makes a huge difference in the appearance. Put your name in your code. I had about 10 submissions with no name, right? Always put your name in your code. It's your work. It's your creative product. Take credit for it, right? Throw your name in there. Throw your name in every file. Put your name in every function if you want, right? It's your work. Take credit for it. Relish in it. I'll tell you a story from my past. I told a different story in the earlier section, so I'll tell a different one here. I was working for a think tank back in the 80s, and it was Air Force related. So we had lots of people with, you know, stripes on their shoulders running around and large egos and stuff. And one of the things we did, we had a number of computers around this campus, and they were connected by networking. Now the internet was still two networks, ARPANET and MILNET. It was still kind of up and coming. But we had a local network that theoretically connected these different machines. And my friend and I, my friend Larry, we were working there together, and we were like, hey, we should build an email system so people can send messages to one another, right? So we figured out how the mail system works on the Linux systems, right? So it's listening on port 25, et cetera, and we went through what's called a send mail configuration file. You never want to do that. And we basically got mail working from machine to machine, and this was great, right? A lot of technical work went into that. Mail's finally working, we're done, right? Well, one day, we get an email, and it's from Brigadier General Jeremiah Jackson. That's not his real name. But he was Brigadier General, and your mail system is broken. Can you please fix it? Okay, what's the problem? Well, when I send email, it lists it as coming from Jeremiah Jackson, but it should say from Brigadier General Jeremiah Jackson. Please fix this. And my friend was like, I'm going home. Right, this was silly. But I didn't like going home at the time. I was in a weird relationship, and I liked working until like the middle of the night anyway. And I wanted to learn about this aspect of the mail system. So anyway, I threw myself into it. I spent a few hours, and I got this to where it would say Brigadier General, right? And didn't think much about it. So about 2 weeks later, my boss calls me in, and I go into his office and I sit down, and he's like, did you exchange email with Brigadier General blah blah? And I'm like, yeah. Did you do some work for him? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm thinking like, oh, I'm in trouble. And he says, you know, I just got notice he put a note in your file, the letter of commendation for your above the call of duty service and taking care of his problem, right?
Nice.
And this was like silly stuff, right? It was like one change in a configuration to like add this thing in the front of somebody's name. Nothing technical about it, right? I never got even a thank you for getting the mail system working. It took months of work. My friend never got a thank you, right? So what I told the other section, I'll tell you, right? You do all this work and you get this big thing working and it does all these amazing things and bells and whistles and mutators and accessors and all that. And chances are the people downstream don't care about that. They don't even know that that's there. Because as a programmer, a lot of times if you do your job perfectly well, if you're very, very skilled, you're going to be invisible, right? You're only noticed when things break. And then everybody's like, who wrote this? So a lot of times it's that polish, it's that extra stuff, it's the non-technical aspects that will end up perhaps making a big difference. And that's kind of unfortunate in some ways, but it's a really, really good thing to learn because a lot of people don't ever learn that. And you might be in a situation, I mean, you don't want to be in a super hyper competitive situation necessarily, but there's always an element of that. And you might be the one who gets noticed because you produced a beautiful page of documentation for the software that you wrote. Or you gave it a name that was easy to remember, you know, or something ridiculous like that. It might be the thing that really grabs the attention of somebody 3 levels up the chain. And so keep that in mind when you're working on the stuff and you're done and you're taking a deep breath and you're relaxing, right? Come back at it with new eyes and say, you know, where can I like make this thing shine on the outside as much as it does on the inside? So that's my anecdote for the day, for the quarter. So yeah, let me see if I can dig up my code and see if there's anything worth mentioning in there. Any questions on PA4?
No, but it didn't, that extra line didn't matter.
Why are they putting an extra line?
It's because every single, you're printing a line to print line. So when you print line, you're printing, and then the cursor's going to be out here.
Is it more than, oh,
So when you're doing cursor,
so like you
print
have
line,
to
print line.
like manually remove it afterwards.
Yeah.
It was just like,
Maybe you could use like grep or something, and then only copy.
oh my god. All right.
Notice I don't have my name in there anywhere.
Just like right.
I don't know if you can use grep.
So you don't put your name on something that you know has no bugs then, so
Yeah. So 20Q, so main program, right? So string database, all right? I wanted this set up so that if I want to point to a different initial file, I can just change that one line. Most people didn't do that, but I didn't take off points for it because, you know, I didn't take off points for not putting your name in either because I've done that every assignment up to here, and at this point, you've got it or you don't. So taking off more points doesn't really make a difference, I don't think.
12 wants to get that straight.
Yeah. So same thing with string database, right? The idea here was you want to point to a different file, you come right in here and you change one line. Some people did this, but they put this in every single file, and I had to change it in like multiple places. And but I figured it out. So I create a tree off of this database. This does the whole construction of the decision tree. Okay, it's a constructor of a tree, but it also takes this string, it opens the file, it does the recursive ingest, and so on. So when I'm done with this one statement, T is my built decision tree, and I'm ready to play a game. So how do I play the game? I say play a game T, and that travels through the tree, does the dialogue with the user, gets the final verdict on whether they were correct or incorrect in their final guess, makes any necessary adjustments, and makes those changes to T, and then I had a T.traverse database. That's what writes the tree back out to a file. So that's the whole main program, right, as usual. Fairly succinct, just to keep things simpler. So the play a game method, node and previous node, I made things harder on myself than I had to. I remembered where I moved from at each time that I moved down the tree so that when I get to my final leaf, if I need to make a correction, I know which way my parent was pointing at me. I don't think you have to actually do that. I didn't close my scanner, bad. Resource leak.
I think I came up with an issue when I closed the scanner because it would actually close the
Oh,
system.
yeah, if you do it and then you try to play again,
Yeah.
that'll probably weird it out. Yeah,
How did that happen?
that's why I didn't close it. So this could start with an empty file, right, which I didn't require you to do. But if the root's null, meaning that it didn't read anything from the file, I do this one time init, which just builds the little is it hard pillow rock tree, right, explicitly. So temp pointer, and then my instructions, think of an object to try to guess what you're thinking of. So not terribly wordy, but it says something. And then as long as temp's a question, basically print out the text with a question mark at the end. Get the next line as the user's answer. So some people try to do next here because they figure, yes, no, that's only a single word. I'll just read one word with next. Well, that's a problem because now you're mixing the ingest of information from standard in with the processing of that information. And that's more often than not going to get you into trouble. So in my mind, I'm reading one line at a time. Give me a yes, give me a no, give me a question, tell me what you were thinking of, that kind of thing. Always one line at a time, so I'm always doing next line instead of next.
So with that would, it doesn't matter if you typed in yes or yellow, it would still read as a yes.
Correct, yes. And I could modify, so I take the next line. Why do I concatenate a space here?
I remember there being issues with the two-string.
So I'm calling the character at method on this string, and I'm asking for the first character.
So you don't access something that's not there.
Yeah, if somehow next line came back with an empty string, and I said empty string character at 0, it'll say invalid location. So I just threw a space on there, just to be lazy. So here I just check to see if that first character is a Y or an N. You could do equals Y equals yes, something like that, if you wanted to be more explicit. Here's another stylistic note, and I saw this in a few cases. Some people wanted you to say yes, Y-E-S, or no, N-O, and that's okay, but the logic that was coded was if this string equals Y-E-S, then go to the left, otherwise go to the right. And what's that doing? It's saying that you can either say Y-E-S or anything else, and anything else will be taken as a no. So if the person types just a Y, the code's interpreting that as no, and that gets really confusing. So if you're going to insist on a particular type of input, make sure that you're specifying all the types of inputs, or be really clear when you talk to the user and say enter yes for yes, anything else for no. Okay, some people went really, really general and said you could say yes or Y or uppercase yes or lowercase y, or gave me a whole bunch of options, which was cool. So here I actually like force you to say Y or N, and if you don't put in one of those, then I scold you and get some more text, and do that until you've answered yes or no. And then if it's yes, I move down to the yes side, otherwise I move down to the no side, and you kick out of this loop when you're at a leaf node. Whoa, I didn't know it would do that. You kick out of this loop when you're at a leaf node, and then you say, okay, I think I've got it, is it A? And I print out whatever the answer is. And then I read an answer again with the next line, and if you say not yes or no, I get you to say something correct. If you say yes, I gloat a little, and I'm done. Otherwise, tell me what you were thinking of. Type a question for which yes means final answer, and a no means the answer that I incorrectly guessed. So very explicit, and some people were very explicit about this. Give me an answer for which yes is a bear and no is a laptop. Some people went further and said, give me a question that differentiates between a bear and a laptop. You could say, does it eat berries? And then it said, if the answer to does it eat berries is yes, is that a bear or a laptop? And so it let you specify like how you were phrasing the question and which way it went. And that's cool. So lots of different ways to approach this. User interface perspective, right? And it's a whole separate kind of area, but it's also an area where sort of you can be more creative sometimes in how you want to structure things. And we all use software all the time. We know what we like. We know what's annoying, right? So the more we've dealt with that, we can hopefully do a better job than people before us have done. All right, so we get that, and then all of this is creating that new node and pointing to it. And like I say, I made my life way more complicated than I think I needed to, but this very explicitly sort of builds that new little 3-node tree and tacks it onto where it was. So this is the one-time init, and it just builds up a tree with, is it an animal, yes or no. I use the keyword static down here because I'm calling this method one-time init. Actually, I don't know if I need to be static. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't actually need to be. Yes, it does. Can I make static reference to non-static method? Ah, yes. So because I'm inside my main method, and my main method is static, this method that I'm calling has got to be static also. But in general, you don't need to use the static keyword. And some people kind of did a lot of statics. But here's a typical example. So you're defining your main class, and you've got a public static void main. With your argument list. And suppose up here you declare string temp. And down here you say temp. So temp is an instance variable, right? I didn't say static string temp, I said string temp. It's an instance variable, which means if I were to say something like main m equals new main, I could say m dot temp equals, right? Temp is intended to be referenced as a field of an instance of this class main, right? It's our usual way of making variables. But when we have our main method here, public static void main, this is run by the system by saying whatever we call this class dot main with whatever arguments. In other words, it's run as a static instance, a static method of this class. And we don't have an instance of a main that has a temp. So this is where you start getting messages like cannot make non-static reference to blah, blah, blah. And so you start making these things static. And there's a few cases where that's the right thing to do, but more often than not, it's taking you down a rabbit hole. And you end up eventually making everything static everywhere in sight. And then at some point you get to somewhere where it won't accept a static. And it says make this non-static, and now you start going down a different hole, and it just becomes a big mess. If you find yourself starting to use the word static for something other than public static void main, take a step back, okay, or shoot an email, and see if that's really what you need to do. And it's generally pretty rare. This is kind of an exception because I had a method that I was calling from the static method main. But usually from main, what you're going to do is you're going to construct classes, and you're going to run methods inside those classes. And those don't need to be static, right? In fact, you usually don't want them to be.
So could you have solved that by putting plug in inside the tree class?
Yeah. All right, so play a game. There's one time init, and then the tree is just the tree class we looked at before. Oh no, this one does the ingest. So read a line that's S if it's a question. If it's not a question, what does this do? Opens a scanner.
I was reading interesting things about working in the programming profession, and they said like 70 to 90% of what you're going to be doing is reading other people's code,
Yeah.
even your own.
Mhm.
Going back through takes like twice or 3 times as long or even longer.
Oh,
to
yeah,
understand
yeah.
Exactly what it is you did,
Yep.
especially if you were being clever.
Mm-hmm. Ah, okay. So it begins with a question. All right, so reading the question, right, it should be a cue in the beginning. Read the actual text of the question, so that's text. Set the question flag to true, and then set the yes branch equal to what read tree returns. So that's the recursive ingest of the left, and then the recursive ingest of the right. And then set root equal to that node and return. And then read tree is the pure recursive one. So if there's not a next line, that's actually an error, but we'll return null. Otherwise, read the next line. If it's an A, build up the 3 node, right? Just the node, root node equal to the answer, and the children are null. Otherwise, save the text from the next line, and then do the recursive read for the left and right subtrees, and return that. And then the output side is just a node left-right traversal, so we call the traverse method on the node of the root. We pass it the print writer, and the node traverse is just the usual recursive. So print out the root, followed by a new line, followed by the text, and then if there's a left child, traverse that. If there's a right child, traverse it. So that's node left-right.
What's the ternary saying in the print line?
If it's a question, print out a Q, otherwise print out an A.
Oh, the question's a Boolean?
Yeah, question's a Boolean. Well, it's a flag in the node. It's a Boolean.
So that says if it is a question, okay, I see.
Print out a Q, otherwise print it out an A. And then in either case, print out a colon followed by a new line, and then print out the text, the actual string. So that's a 1-line version of printing the 2 lines for the node.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about ternaries.
I go crazy with them sometimes. I really like them. I don't know why.
I used a couple, and then there was another time where I wanted to use the ternary operator again,
Mhm.
similar, but it was different enough where I was like, I think this is going to be one of those where it breaks
Yeah.
if I use it. So
And then you can start nesting them too,
yeah.
which you kind of do. So you do this in Excel when you do like if statements.
Mhm.
That's basically a ternary operator. You have a condition and you list a thing if it's true and a thing if it's false. And you just start like nesting those out. You can do if then else's forever.
So would it be like condition, and then question mark, and then another ternary
Mm-hmm.
condition with 2 outcomes?
Yeah,
And then colon, another one.
yeah. So it becomes a tree. Everything's a tree, man.
You should have that as
Everything's a
bonus
tree,
assignment.
man. I was having a hard time getting that big database that you put up going,
Mm-hmm.
but I finally got it to work. I don't know why. Basically, I finally got my Eclipse to link with Git.
Okay.
So now all my paths are different because it's in a Git file or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But finally works, and I was thinking of a rabbit, and the last thing it says is, "Does Elmer Fudd get really, really mad at this animal?" I was like, "Oh,
Nice.
it's got it."
Awesome. Yeah, I tested on my own machine, and I just put my database under /temp/q. So I just typed that in for the database for everybody's code, and just went with that. I had a few people who warned me that their program might destroy my database file, and so make sure you make a copy. So I always do. So thanks. But I never assume that things are going to go well. I do assume you won't delete all my files though, or plant viruses in my root.
I think most of us were wiping a database file and
Yeah.
finally got it working.
Yep. Yeah, I had some symbols for like copying it over.
Yeah, it makes it hard to debug when every time you stop, go fix the file.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I was helping people in my office, and we'd keep getting caught by that. Like, wait, it just worked. Why isn't it working
Yeah,
now?
that's the best part is when you wipe the file and you don't realize
Yeah.
that, and then all of these errors pop up.
Yep.
No.
Yeah, I did that for a long time. I was like, this is working.
Yeah, it's good.
And the stress that puts on you. Oh,
You're
man.
you're reading from an empty tree. That was my big issue.
I somehow printed the addresses of each node and I don't know like what I
Oh, really?
doing differently, but it was printing something, but it wasn't what I wanted it to print.
Oh, if you like just print a node, maybe.
It was like
it won't have a
T-node
two
address,
string.
T-node
Yeah,
address,
yeah.
T-node address.
Because
So
you-
it's like you were cycling through just the addresses
Fun.
of T-node.
All right. So let's talk about client server a little more, and then we'll go on to the really fun stuff. So this was the server code we were playing with last time. So it listens on port 1220 for a connection request, and then once somebody connects to it, it receives a line of input. It prints out here what the input was, and then it sends it back in uppercase. So it's just a little shout echo thing. So I can run this. And I can connect through Telnet to port 1220, and it'll tell me I got a connection over here, and I can type something and it'll show me what I typed, what I received on this side, and it'll send it back in uppercase over here. So it does that, and then I can close the Telnet session, and it goes back to waiting for a connection request. So that's fine if you're on one machine, right? You can test your client server setup on one machine if you like. But once you've got that working, it should work across machines also. So after class, I'm going to put that router in the collaboratorium. And if you want to experiment with this, here's what you do. So plug it in. I'm going to leave it unplugged normally so the router police don't come after us. And the network name is CSE 223, and the password is password 223. And those are on the sticky on the side. And this will farm out IP addresses 192.168.2 point something. So I'm going to go to my network connections, and I'm just going to connect to that instead of Clark's network. So it's configuring, and here we go, connected. All right, so on Linux, I can do IP address show. That was supposed to not be noticed. And it tells me 192.168.2.3. So that's my internet address for this server.
What did you type in?
IP address show. So this line up here. But you can also do ifconfig, and they'll show you the same thing. Tell you. So for Windows, just do IP config. Do that from a DOS shell or something. And from your phone, you can say again?
Yeah, you just do it from command prompt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for your phone, you can get apps that'll show your IP address. This is my address on this local network. right? Now, if this is connected to the outside world, which it's not, I would actually have a different IP address to the internet, right? But that address gets you to the router, and then the router sends packets from there to my laptop
So
at that address.
Which one? There's like multiple.
So you're on Clark's network right now, right?
Oh yeah.
So 10.0.100.198 probably.
The default gateway.
Default gateway gets you to the router, so
Oh, I see.
IPv4 address 10.0.100.198.
That should be it.
Yeah, so try connecting to CSE 223 and see if you can figure out what your address is. And the reason to go through this exercise here is because sometimes, especially Windows, doesn't like connecting to routers that don't have network access. It'll complain and say this isn't connected to the internet. And depending on your setup, it may or may not let you connect. So see if you can get to CSE 223 with that password and get it to where it says connected.
On my Mac, it's saying that IP address show isn't a thing.
On a Mac, try ifconfig.
And then do we look for?
ifconfig, look for something. There'll be one that says LO, that's your loopback, that's 127.0.0.1. There may be one which says LAN, but you want something with a W in the front, usually for wireless. And look for iNet. So you online?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm finding FW0. That's giving IPv6.
What's it say for?
I'm finding the actual IPv4. I mean, there's your local. This is
There's your local.
It's just a lot of dense text.
Well,
there's that right there. I don't know.
are you on Clark or CSE 223?
Oh no, I'm actually.
Okay. Yeah, the 10
I'm
point.
on CSE 223, so it's the 192.168.2.
You got 6. Yes, good.
Um,
All right. So so go ahead and run putty and make a raw connection to 192.168.2.3 and set your port to 1220. And whoever does that first should get connected over here.
It's taking a long time to connect.
Yeah, mine took forever. Port what?
1220.
Connection refused.
Uh-oh. It's out there.
Tell me this thing.
So,
So set it to raw,
oh, wait, that was what it was.
and you want 2.3, not 2.6.
Oh.
'Cause 2.6 is you.
Sit there. Realize what's the tell
2.3.
command on Mac?
Yeah.
What's
Hey,
the
there
tell
we go.
command in Unix?
Yes, it's working.
All right, he's online. So he says hi. Did it shout back hi at you?
It did.
Okay, good.
Hi.
All right, now we can see everything you type. It's super secret spyware.
Yeah, put your password.
Type in your password.
Just design an efficient.
So if you're on Windows, you can use PuTTY. Just set it to a raw connection, put in the IP address, in this case 2.3, and set the port to 1220. If you're on Linux, install Telnet and use Telnet. Telnet IP address space 1220. That's the easiest way. And that should work for Mac also. Haha.
So how do I get out of
You
it?
can close your PuTTY session.
Oh, okay, nice, okay.
Install them.
Is
Look
there
up
a
how to
graceful
install
way to
them.
get out of this?
So their client exited. Oh, someone else came in. Good.
Nice.
All right. Cool.
We're all excited. We're gonna be famous on YouTube.
Yay. Yeah, we should be filming this, man. All right. So this lets you use this, right, basically to go machine to machine. So if you're doing this for PA5, right, you're going to pick a machine to run the server on, and that's the machine you need to know the IP address of. Okay, if you're the client, it doesn't really matter because you're connecting to the server. But whatever you're running the server on, do your ifconfig or ipconfig, figure out what your address is. And then on the client side, use that address, use whatever port you're using, 1210, 1220, whatever, and it should connect up through the router. And if you wire your code to take an IP address and do this, right, you can just use localhost or 127.0.0.1 and run it on one machine. Debug it, get it working, and then just find a friend and say, hey, let's try this on 2 machines. All right, makes sense? All right, I'm shutting down the server. Gone. Already got Eclipse. All right, questions? All right, we're at a quarter of. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10 of, and then we'll talk about the URL class. This will be fun.